I would consider this to be live right now. Joining us now, Jason Miyares, delegate from Virginia Beach, running for Attorney General. I guess the operative question is, Jason, why are you running for Attorney General?
Chris, it's great to join you. It's great to be with you. I mean, listen, I think at the end of the day, as my friend Bob McDonald notes, when you're running for Attorney General, you have to recognize that you're running to be Virginia's top cop. And I think that's important for everybody to understand. What is the role of Attorney General? It is like this intersection between the civil and the criminal that meets. And obviously, we're going to talk about the civil in a second and protecting constitutional rights and liberties. But on the criminal, I think we've seen a very, very different mindset that has come into Richmond over the last 2 years. It's quite frankly a criminal first, victim last mindset. And I was a prosecutor in Virginia Beach several years ago, but with prosecutors, when I was there, we had in the basement of the courthouse the victim witness office, and the victim witness office is where we would meet with the victims of crime, particularly violent crimes, to go over their case and talk about where things are. And prosecutors used to be able to say this in Virginia. We used to be able to sit down with the victims of crime and say, listen, being in the same room if somebody has done such unspeakable pain and horror to you is going to be one of the most difficult things in your life. Right. Reliving that moment is going to be one of the most painful things you're going to have to go through.
Right.
Having to suffer through the humiliation of a cross-examination from a defense attorney is going to be equally difficult. But if you do this,
right,
if you go through this, I can promise you that in a judge and a jury convict this person, that this person will be going away for a very long time and won't be able to harm you or another innocent victim again. Prosecutors no longer could say that in today's progressive Virginia. And what we've seen and the way that things have changed is Virginia up until this year was one of the safest states in the country, had the lowest recidivism rate. In other words, criminals that get out, they don't commit crimes again. And instead, what we've done is we have had, particularly with this McAuliffe-Northam Parole Board, completely have forgotten the victims. And if there's anything that I want to be as a candidate for Attorney General, somebody who's been in a courtroom with both violent criminals, more importantly, the victims of violent crimes, you want to be given their voice and be a voice for the voiceless. So I think, I often say your safety is my mission for Attorney General. And I think it's critically important that we have that mindset in that office, which is the opposite of what we currently have in Richmond. I think everybody recognizes we're in desperate need of a check and balance of what's going on in Richmond. And to give you an idea of how much things have changed.
Let's describe check and balance.
Yeah, check and balance, sure.
We use that term because we're in a Republican form of democracy. We have three separate, distinct branches of government. We're not talking about the branches checking each other. I think you're talking about partisan checking.
Well, some of that, but some of it is branches. I mean, the last time you had one party control in Richmond by the Democratic Party, i.e. the governor, the lieutenant governor, the attorney general, the state senate, and the state house, the Democratic majority leader of the House of Delegates, Dickie Cranwell, was a proud member of the NRA. And you had a lot of Democrats that represented in suburban or even some rural areas that were not what we see today, which is a very, very far left, progressive, kind of uber left mindset of what we've gone in Richmond. And when Rachel Maddow is praising you, and a far left commentator on MSNBC, when she's praising you, the job you're doing and how great you've done, you've done something wrong. Because Virginians, and you can see the polling, they are not far left. They don't want to be California. So some of that check and balance you could say is partisan. Some of it is just institutional. Right. I think some of the governor's executive orders that he's issued clearly violate individuals' First Amendment rights and religious liberty. It's absurd to me that the governor has issued executive orders that have said massage parlors and ABC and liquor stores are considered essential and need to remain open.
That was massage parlors?
Yeah, but at the same time,
do you mean like the corporate entities like Massage Envy and that kind of stuff, or like the more seedier? I mean, this is kind of weird.
I don't know whether they're seedy or not. I'm just saying the governor's executive order said churches had to remain closed, but liquor stores and other entities could remain open. So think about it. You could go get a loaf of bread But for people that are religious or faith-based, you couldn't go get your daily bread of life. That's a clear violation, in my opinion, of your First Amendment right and the Virginia Statute of Religious Freedom.
Right.
And so that's an institutional check. You should have had an attorney general that really wanted to follow the Constitution and actually challenge this in court instead of what we currently have, which is Mark Herring is essentially just whatever Northam asked for, he's just following and he's pushing. And I think a lot of these executive orders are constitutionally dubious by nature. They're very, very overly broad. They're not narrowly tailored, and they don't make exemption for, I think, religious organizations, religious practices. And I think that's an example of what I think could be an institutional check and balance on what's going on in Richmond.
Well, in that case, I mean, you would expect an attorney general of the same party as the executive branch, governor, to more or less rubber stamp what their policies are. But I guess the question would go back to you as attorney general. If a candidate for
sorry, I think I lost you real quick.
No, you're back.
I'm back. I apologize.
So if a candidate, if a governor, if you have a Republican governor and you're a Republican attorney general, do you offer independence from the executive branch, the executive mansion at that point too? Because I guess the case to be made is like, well, you can't do what you said you just were running against, you know?
Well, but I think that's the role that you're elected to do. You take an oath of office to the United States Constitution and the Virginia Constitution. You don't take an oath of office to a political party.
Or
whoever is elected governor, whether it's.
Now you froze up again.
I don't know if that's me or you. I apologize. It might be. They say I have trouble operating heavy equipment, so that may be me. I'm sorry about that.
No more Jason.
Listen, I mean, I think at the end of the day, I don't take an oath of allegiance to either a governor or a political party. I take an oath of allegiance to the U.S.
That's a natural question you're going to get, right? I mean, it's one thing to say,
if I had a Republican governor, yeah, I mean, if I had a Republican governor that I felt was overstepping their constitutional bounds or issuing executive orders, that's not where my loyalty is going to lie. And then I'll stand up for the people of Virginia. I mean, listen, everywhere I go, one of the common refrains I hear, I don't care if it's somebody who's having their religious liberty violated, whether it's a police officer, whether it's a small business trying to stay open during COVID, is they feel like nobody has their back.
Right.
They don't feel like pop culture has their back. They don't feel like the media has their back. And they sure as they don't feel like this attorney general or the government has their back. And I want people to feel like they're going to have an attorney general that has their back, because right now they don't. And that's going to be, giving a voice to the voiceless is going to be an important role, I think, for that office.
Well, I also think it sets a tone, doesn't it, culturally in our society when we have potential. I mean, we haven't seen a statistic yet in Virginia for this year or over last year. Is crime going up? We don't know. I think by the time the attorney general's race gets to the general election, we're going to have a better understanding what's going on in crime in Virginia.
It's in 34 major cities in the country, crime has gone up by an average. My understanding is anywhere between 20 to 30% in the last 12 months.
Wow, that's
34 of the largest cities in the country.
You were a youngin back in the day, back in the 90s, when frankly the Republicans built their brand on crime, taxes, and education, didn't they?
Well, I'm 45. I'm old enough to remember when Richmond was the murder capital of America. I'm old enough to remember that when I moved to Richmond right after college for a brief period of time, there was still a lot of concerns about crime and violence. But what you had things like truth in sentencing and abolition of parole and certain mandatory minimums, which are all under siege now, and their Democrats are working like crazy to get rid of them, that fundamentally kept Virginians safe. Because I can tell you as a former prosecutor, well north of 80% of violent crime is done by repeat offenders. So if you want to lower violent crime, you go after the repeat offenders. That's the quickest way. There's no magic bullet here. You have a certain small number of violent criminals that do repeat offenses, and you have to make sure if they do the crime, to do the time. That's rapidly changing in Virginia. And as surely as the sun rises, what's going to happen is you're going to have more violence and more victims. But that calculus doesn't seem to be made at some of the, kind of woke social justice legislators and General Assembly that we have right now in Richmond. So my hope is that we have an attorney general to be a check and balance on that.
but let's transition if we can, because I think, when I look back at the 90s, it was a reaction to the crime of the 80s and the 70s, and people said that's enough. We want to crack down on it. We did. The penalties worked. Crime went down, safety went up. Like you said, Virginia was one of the safest. I think we got to number 4 in safety in the country. And there probably was a bit of over prosecution in the 90s and the early aughts. I mean, people got, got politically powerful and politically popular to keep raising the penalties. We might have gone a little overboard upon reflection, but let's take a look at the Virginia Parole Board, which many of those as a transition, many of those people who are being discussed came in before parole was abolished. So they're up for parole. That's the controversy. I don't know how far that's sunk into the voters of Virginia's minds, but recap that for us. What's going on there?
Yeah, well, I mean, to address your first point before I get to the parole board, they say the only thing that you learn from history is nobody learns from history. Mm-hmm. There is nothing, and I mean virtually nothing, that has been proposed in this General Assembly in the last 12 to 24 months that wasn't tried before the 1970s with disastrous results. Getting rid of mandatory minimums, bringing back parole, early release of violent offenders. All of this was tried before in the 70s, and it led to a crime explosion in the 70s and early 80s, and then we obviously had the correction that happened later. With the parole board, you're exactly right. We have, George Allen's my state co-chairman, and as he told me recently, he said, listen, when I was governor, I literally put the families of victims of violent crimes on the parole board to make sure that the victims' voices are heard. And so for your audience to understand, the way the law is in Virginia, and this is a George Allen era reform, it's if you're going to let a violent criminal out on parole, you have to get input from the victims. You are required by law to attempt to notify the family members and get their input on whether this person should be released or not and what the impact would be on you. We know from the whistleblower emails that the parole board did not even attempt to notify the victims, and the Attorney General's office knew about it. I mean, they were all in all the email traffic. So they knew it wasn't happening. They knew the law was being broken. I mean, that's your job. The Attorney General is also supposed to be able to advise some of these governmental agencies, and they're clearly violating the law. So you have cases like, I'll give an example, a gentleman that I just met with not too long ago, Mark Brinkley. Mark Brinkley discovered the body of Bessie Roundtree, his grandmother. She was 78 years old, victim of a horrific home invasion, brutally raped and stabbed to death. As he said, to me, that the monster didn't even have the dignity of pulling a knife out of her body after he was done with her. And he found out that the killer's name was Patrick Schooley. He was given not 1, not 2, but 3 life sentences without the possibility of parole. 3 of them. Wow. Now, to me, I hear that and I'm like, well, this person likely is never going to see the light of day again.
Right.
Well, in today's new progressive Virginia, Patrick Schooley got released. And the only way Mark Brinkley found out is
that guy actually got released.
Oh, he's out. Yeah, he's been out.
What happened with
Mark Brinkley found out from his wife. His wife heard it on the news and called him. When he called the parole board to complain, the parole board said, "You don't need to worry about this anymore. It's no longer your problem." This is what Mark is sharing with me, and I just said, as Attorney General, that'll be my problem. If a parole board makes a maneuver like that.
Let me dial into that case. That guy was sentenced to 3 life without parole convictions.
Mm-hmm.
How the hell does a guy without parole get parole?
You're going to need to ask the McAuliffe Northern Parole Board on that one. And then you have, obviously, the Vincent Martin case. I mean, that guy was given, probably what's so incensed about the Vincent Martin who murdered the young 23-year-old Michael Connors is that Vincent Martin had already gotten a huge break. He was sentenced to 30 years in prison for multiple armed robberies. And he got out after serving 6 years of a 30-year sentence. And then he's out not even a year and he commits another armed robbery. When he's leaving, he's going the wrong way in a one-way street. And that's when 23-year-old Michael Connors stopped him for the traffic stop. And he's shot in the neck when he's approaching the car. And Michael Connors is struggling on the ground to survive. And then Vincent Martin gets out of the car and puts, 3 bullets in his head. And what's probably so sad is that leaked audio that came from the governor. I think it was the governor's chief of staff, in which the governor's chief of staff said, Vincent Martin hasn't done anything wrong. He's a cop killer. He's a cop killer who's given life without the possibility of parole. And it just shows, it just illustrates again, what I've said earlier, a criminal first, victim last mindset.
Well, I mean, if I can, Jason, I mean, if you go, I don't know about these cases, but it seems to me that to avoid the death penalty, you plead down to, okay, we'll take life without parole. You get the conviction, right?
Right.
You're a prosecutor, you get this, right? It's a negotiation at that point. Do we want to go on the road of the death penalty, which we don't have in Virginia anymore? But when we did, that was probably part of the negotiation.
Well, it absolutely is. That is very, very common in with a lot of prosecutors with death penalty cases under the old, kind of the old regime, and that obviously no longer exists anymore. And then, listen, I am aware of some ongoing investigations. I have a lot of support from a lot of Commonwealth's attorneys and a lot of prosecutors, so I'm not going to say where. I'm not going to say too many of the details, other than there's an ongoing investigation of a situation where they have somebody in custody for a separate murder. There is a possibility this person may be culpable in multiple other crimes. And as this investigator informed me, in the old days, we could basically, use the threat of, okay, if you will just tell us where these bodies are buried, maybe we can not seek the death penalty. Now, when you have a perpetrator that's already going to prison for one murder, they don't have much incentive to cooperate with you, and so that creates extra anguish for family members that have lost loved ones. That's one of the hardest things. If you're a family member that has had a child abduction or a family member that's had a loved one missing, one of the most difficult things is just the not knowing. It's the not knowing.
I mean,
and
you're a parent, right? I mean,
yeah. Oh my gosh.
To think that something would happen to your kids, or that they would have to see something happen to you, and then to have this.
No, it's horrific.
It seems like, I mean, I don't know how they're going to get, I mean, from a Republican standpoint, running this as a statewide campaign is unfortunately fairly advantageous, because these are hard stories to tell, but they're real, and they move people emotionally. So like, we just had a girl here in our local high school, 12 years old, shot 5 times in the chest walking home from school. This is a nice suburban area where these things aren't supposed to happen. That's why people move out here. And a kid walks up, 14-year-old kid walks up and shoots her 5 times in the chest and kills her for no reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, there has to be some understanding what the hell is going to go on.
Well, I mean, and that's quite frankly, somebody told me the other day, I met a gentleman the other day who said he was a 50-year-old liberal who got mugged by reality, and now he's conservative. And the one thing I always try to stress when I'm in the legislative body is good intentions does not mean good results. There seems to be this mindset from some of these legislators I serve with that says, I have good intentions. But that does not guarantee you good results. And that comes across a host of different things on a host of different issues. And obviously, people that on the other side of the aisle feel like our criminal justice system has been too hard on criminals. But the reality is, once you've actually really looked at a lot of the data points, and then also been with the victims of violent crime, you get that perspective. And there's a lot of Virginians that don't think that's appropriate. They don't support what the General Assembly, what the House of Delegates just passed, which gave 50% time off, earn good time credit off, 50% off automatically your sentence if you're a child pornographer. It's really the worst sentence. The longer the sentence, the more time off you get. And that bill passed out of the House of Delegates. They got rid of the presumption against bond for violent offenders.
I don't know how you go back to your districts and say, I loosened the penalties for child pornography.
Well, they're going to have to answer that to the fall. And I don't know. I was baffled.
It goes into strengthen the penalties.
Yeah. Well,
for child pornography.
It's painful. And, you saw these for example, the presumption against bond for violent offenders, they've gotten rid of that presumption. So it used to be in certain heinous crimes, rape, first-degree murder, child abduction, kidnapping, it was okay. You can make bond, but the presumption is going to be you're a threat to society. You're going to be held in prison until your trial, unless you could show certain things. You're not a threat to society. You're not a threat to flee. But the presumption, the default position is you're going to be held in bond. That credit will be credited to you if you're convicted. But and you could still make bond, but it's just a higher standard. It's just you have to present evidence. So they've gotten rid of that. And as I told several of my colleagues, I said there's very few bills we vote on that unfortunately is going to, that we just, it's going to lead to some type of tragic situation. This is, I mean, effective July 1, there's going to be a tragic situation that occurs from this, because judges get it wrong. And I just, it really, really worries me about where the direction is right now.
Yeah, I
on the
mean,
public safety
this
issues.
was back in the mid-aughts, and I think Kilgore might have still been AG at the time, because I was working with him, Jerry Kilgore, and I was working with the AG's office on this because it was internet safety. Because
Oh, yeah.
starting to come on the internet more and more, and I put together a program, and Assistant AG came around. We did some programs in my district, very, very impactful, very helpful for a lot of folks. But when I was reading through the code, and I'm not an attorney, I found this glitch, this gap in the sentencing, right, for the penalties. And I said, well, I'm going to put a bill in here to strengthen the penalty for child pornography. Well, you had some conversation with the AG's office, one thing led to another. And anyway, you're going through the process. I'm on the elevator at the General Assembly building, and I get on the elevator and someone goes, hey, Sachs, how's that child porn bill coming? And I took a step back because the elevator was crowded. I'm like, anti-child pornography bill. It's just like,
Right.
Whoa.
Right.
It's right. But now, if I'm hearing you correctly, this has sort of been dialed back a bit, which is almost nauseous.
Well, what it was what's called a good time credit bill, which is they would just get 50%, up to 50% off your time served. So listen, the House of Delegates also voted to end all mandatory minimums for drug dealers, not drug users, drug dealers, including second offense dealing drugs to a child at a bus stop. So you've done it once, you've been convicted, you get out again, you do it a second time, so it's your second offense, and they still wanted to get rid of any and all mandatory minimum penalties. I don't understand that mindset. They can answer that question for the voters. But when I say it's a criminal first, victim last mindset, that's exactly the type of example I'm using. And I think it's fundamentally making us less safe.
Well, this is going to be an interesting fall season when we'll see how the electorate responds, won't we? We'll see what they're really all about.
We'll see. I don't think Virginians want us to suddenly be California. I don't think we are a left-wing state. We're a center state. We value common sense in Virginia, and there's not a lot of common sense right now with some of the elected leaders that we have in Richmond.
Obviously,
right
you have enough votes to hit them on. I mean, goodness knows you got to be worried about these things, just how the bill could look at the end of the day. And they're saying, well, we really don't care. We're going to put it out there anyway. And I think they've overstepped the mark in a lot of respects. I think they took a mandate to not be Donald Trump to go and do just about everything else that they wanted to do. And, I think we're going to see a little bit of a riptide from the wave of 17 and 19.
Well, I hope the Virginians will value some common sense because, like I said, there's not a lot of it, and I think we have the right message for the fall.
Well, let's wrap it up. Jason Miyares, running for Attorney General. What's your pitch to Republican voters coming up a week from tomorrow?
Listen, I think at the end of the day, the stakes going to be higher this election. I think it's going to decide whether Virginia is going to be more like New York or more like Florida. I don't want us to be more like New York. I'm a Virginian. I'm proud of it. I think if you're looking for what we want out of Attorney General, you want somebody who's been a prosecutor or somebody who's gone after the bad guys, because as my friend Bob McDonald noted, you're running to be Virginia's top cop. I'm proud to always stand with law enforcement, and looking forward to literally prosecuting the case, so to speak, in the fall on that front. You also want somebody who's going to be a protector of your individual rights and your individual liberties. If Miyares is a different name, it's Cuban. But that so animates me because of my mother's story, fleeting the horrors of living under Castro's, socialist paradise. But listen, when you live in a household with somebody that lived 5+ years under socialism, it's not just a theory. It's not just something you read in a textbook. The impact of that's literally in your DNA. So I have a deep, deep appreciation for what this country is. I have a deep appreciation for our constitutional liberties, because I think ultimately it's created what I like to call the American miracle. And if there's any reason why I'm running, it's to preserve that American miracle. That's both preserving your individual right to defend yourself and your family, defending your religious liberty, your freedom of conscience, and ultimately recognizing that I want to empower you, and I don't want to empower government. I think it's one of the genius of this country. It made us, give us more prosperity and more opportunity and more second chances to more people and more families than any country that ever has existed. And so I'll close with this. One of my favorite presidents is Ronald Reagan, and he made this observation. He said, of all the countries in the world, the United States is the only country in which our national anthem ends in a question mark. Are we still the land of the free and the home of the brave? And I think that's a question that has to be answered, quite frankly, by every generation of Americans. And it's going to have to be answered this year by Virginians. I think Virginians will say, rightly, we've gone too far, too fast in this leftward waltz. And, one of my other favorite leaders is Winston Churchill, who said, Americans will always do the right thing after they've exhausted all their options. So I'm proud of our campaign. I'm proud of the where Virginians are going to be. I know they're going to make the right choice in November. I hope, obviously, for everybody sign up to be an unassembled convention delegate, that I'll be there. They'll make the right choice with me. I'm proud of having George Allen and Nick Freitas and Mark Oguchain and Ben Klein and so many other great conservatives stand with me. And so while I'm proud of their endorsements, and more importantly, anybody who's going out on May 8th, I hope to have your endorsement, and hope that everybody listening will sign me as their first choice on May 8th. If not, put me down as your second, but hope to see everybody on the trail ahead.
I was muted because of the dogs. They were going nuts. I'm sure something was being delivered for my daughter. There's no question.
Right.
It's about that time of day. Anyway, Jason Miyares, delegate from Virginia Beach, running for the Republican nomination for Attorney General. Thanks for joining us. We look forward to catching up with you later. We wish everyone the very best of luck next weekend at Unassembled Convention all throughout the Commonwealth. Jason, thanks for joining us.
Thank you. God bless.